Welcome back to another week of Instigating with Clarkey and Drury, brought to you as always by our great friends at Coolbet Canada. Look at that right there. Beautiful hat. Remember, Super Bowl coming up in 2 weekends. Use our friends at Coolbet if you want to lay a little heat down on the action. Eagles, Chiefs. We'll surely chat with our friend Jake Boland-Moss sometime next week and get his thoughts on the big game. But remember to use our friends at Coolbet Canada and my favorite tool, the Bet Builder, to lay your wagers down. We're also brought to you by our friends over at the Listowel Squash Courts, and of course, our new friends and your friends right here on 1000 Wallace Avenue in Listowel. Larry Hudson's Chevrolet Buick GMC. Hudson's has it. And remember, they've got great deals going on right now on trucks. As a matter of fact, they've got a bunch of great deals happening heading into February. Remember, you can get new trucks, 2022 new truck clear out, purchase or lease a new 2022 half-ton truck and receive your choice of a no-charge 4-year GM maintenance plan or a 5-year 100,000-kilometer GM warranty. Remember, you can purchase or lease a new 2022 Colorado or Canyon mid-size truck and receive a $1,000 dealer discount alongside a new set of winter tires, and a $500 gas card. Clarkey not on the show. He's usually here to let us know what's going on over at Larry Hudson's. He's still down in beautiful Punta Cana, but when he comes back, if you're looking for a new truck, a new Colorado, something like that, head in there. You can see Clarkey or one of the other great reps over there at Larry Hudson's. Great show this week. We've got our friend Steve McAllister of the Parleh on to talk about a bunch of topics in sports, including the NHL ratings down in the U.S. dramatically. What are the causes? What can the NHL do to maybe fix that? We'll talk a little baseball, a little football, maybe even a little footy as well, as the Parleh had great coverage of the World Cup. And of course, the transfer deadline closing in European football as well at the end of January. We have so much to chat about with our friend Steve coming up next. Welcome back to Instigating with Clarkey and Drury. Ryan Drury back here, flying solo this week. Well, not totally solo, because we've got a great guest, our great friend from the Parleh group. It is Mr. Steve McAllister. Steve, how are you, my friend? Long time no see.
I'm great, Ryan. We're surviving another Bruce County winter. We're getting off pretty easy so far, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, and you know what that means. The end of February and the middle part of March is going to suck. It's going to be rough going out on the roads, but you know, we're used to that. But I'm glad you're doing well. Things are good. What's going on? Tell us a little bit about what's up over at the Parleh. You guys are always busy over there.
Yeah, it's been a busy, probably since the last time I was on with you and Clarkey, Ryan. Busy. We rebranded kind of the video content portion of the Parleh business to Homestand Sports. So you'll see like James Sharman, Albert Vartanian, Nur Zainab, a bunch of our people now are doing video content for Homestand. So Kevin Kennedy and his group have been busy with that. And then me with the Gaming News Canada newsletter. It's an industry that's really popping right now, as you know, Ryan. And again, there's obviously been some controversy around the amount of sports betting advertising on the various sports networks and on radio. But it's an industry that I think has been more successful in Ontario than people thought it would be. And I'm actually excited. I'm heading off to London this weekend. There's a big gaming conference in England called ICE next week. So I'm going to be over there for 3 days covering that conference for the two newsletters. So looking forward to getting back to Europe for the first time in probably, it must be close to a decade for me.
Yeah, that'll be really exciting. And yeah, I mean, and we can talk a bit about that because it kind of ties into some of the stuff that we can dig into with the NHL, of course, which has plenty of things to talk about as always. But, you know, and we've talked about this with you before. Yes, there's a lot of outcry. There's going to be outcry with anything new. And yes, there a swath and maybe an overabundance at times of advertising for sports betting. Sure. Yeah, I agree. But at the same time, I think that it's one of those things where you can't really have your cake and eat it too, right? Like people want their sports programming to be viable and to survive. And I certainly am speaking as a member of the media, and so are you here. We want the industry to survive. And unfortunately, that takes money. And when advertisers like betting companies are willing to step up and inject the type of cash that they are into these broadcasts, I mean, Steve, at the end of the day, I mean, it's no different than beer commercials, which have been king in Canada on hockey broadcasts for years, or car commercials, whatever. Like, an advertiser steps up and brings that kind of dough to your door. No one is going to turn that away.
No, in terms of economic development, Ryan, this industry has been huge for the province since it launched last April. And again, you and I are both people who work in media, and we know the kind of trouble the media business is going through right now. And the sports betting industry has thrown a lifeline to the media industry through those advertising dollars and marketing dollars. And then you look, iGaming Ontario released its report last week for October to December, and it's crazy numbers, to the point where over the 9 months that we've had an open market in Ontario, there's been almost $900 million in tax revenue for the province. That's a lot of money, obviously. And you look at jobs like not too far from where you are in Waterloo, there's a startup company called Quarter Four that spits out data using artificial intelligence for sports books and other operators in that industry that is employing engineers and other people. And PointsBet Canada, they have an office in downtown Toronto with about 60 employees now, so you look at what this industry is doing at a time when we're trying to get past a pandemic and trying to get through a recession, and this industry has undoubtedly been an economic boost for this country.
You're right, and I understand, because it's a newer thing in terms of the amount of advertising around it. So I understand that people that aren't a fan of it, are a little put off by it. But I would argue that there are things that it's everything in moderation, right? You're trusting people to be adults. It's no different than beer consumption, legalized cannabis consumption now in this country and parts of the one to the south of us. And I'd argue there's things that you can get involved in that country to the south of us legally that are far more dangerous than having betting advertising as part of your sports programming, and Steve, we're not dumb. Sports fans aren't dumb. While some don't like it necessarily as part of the programming, people have been gambling on sports since sports started. Some guy at the first soccer pickup game in England bet a couple pence on his buddy's team winning. It's just always been a reality, and legalizing it, and like you said, making it a benefit in terms of revenue for provinces, states, territories, whatever, is more of a positive, I think, than a negative. And from the media perspective, you said it. I mean, the cuts and layoffs just continue to hammer the industry, the news industry, the sports industry. One of my favorite magazines over in England, maybe you can kick somebody while you're over there in Europe for me, Rock Sound just closed shop. I love that magazine ever since I was a kid. It sucks. So overall, I think it's doing a lot more positive, where there aren't a lot of other people. We hear all these complaints about the state of the industry, Steve. No one else seems to be stepping up to help.
No, and I think, listen, Ryan, it's not a perfect system right now, and we have to keep in mind the regulated industry. This is very, very early days. Like, we're not even 12 months into this new landscape in Ontario yet. And I beat the drum on our newsletter, and we do a LinkedIn audio show every Thursday afternoon with Gaming News Canada, and the deals that Connor McDavid's done with BetMGM, and Austin Matthews with Bet99, and John Tavares with OLG's ProLine product. I've been sounding the drum that those athletes should be involved in a responsible gambling message. And I just think it's bad for their brand personally, and then it's also not good for the industry. But at the same time, there's a real opportunity when you have these high-profile athletes, both past and present, who can give that message. And I think that's been a shortcoming of the industry. I think the television networks have really struggled with the integration of betting content into their broadcasts. I think, there's a lot of people still don't understand what a money line is. They don't know what a same game parlay is. I think there has to be more education for the networks and explaining sports betting to sports fans or around a Leafs game or a Raptors game. But I would say let's be a little bit patient here. To your point, sports betting's been around forever. In a regulated system now, we're seeing tax dollars. And in our province, Ryan, we see what's going on with our healthcare system right now. We see what's going on with our education system. I would suggest $1 billion would come in pretty handy for our provincial government.
Yeah, and I mean, the hope obviously would be that they spend that properly, which, I mean, with governments nowadays, you never know. But this is not a political show, and we're not going to get into that. So what we should get into, though, is we'll talk a little bit. And I want to also, mention, you mentioned a couple of the people involved with, the parlay on the video side of things. Albert, I doubt he remembers me, but I actually worked very briefly with him way back at the Fight Network, way back in the day. So say hi to Albert for me. I mean, James Sharman getting involved with Room 442. All the World Cup coverage was fantastic. You're going to have to do me a solid and get Sharman on this show, because that dude is one of the 3 people responsible for me even becoming a soccer fan. But you guys are cranking out great content over there. The newsletter's fantastic as well. So keep that up. Obviously, the NHL talking point. We're heading into All-Star weekend, and let's maybe start there, because there's so many things to touch on with the NHL right now. And it's the league we all love to complain about. And I just wonder your thoughts on this, because this stat has caused a lot of stir in the recent 48 hours before we recorded this show. NHL US TV national viewership is down 22% this season, per the findings from Austin Karp. NHL regular games to date have averaged 373,000 viewers on ESPN TNT, second season of the league's 7-year deal with Disney and Turner Group. The NHL averaged 478,000 fans last year. That's a pretty precipitous drop. There's a lot of different factors at play here, but in your mind, Steve, what are some of the big ones? Why is there a 20+% decline in viewership?
Yeah, it's funny, Ryan. I did read one report yesterday, and if you take it at face value, they mentioned that there are a lot more games on in the States right now, so that's affected that average, and that is a big reason why the average has dropped, because there's simply more games that are being televised by those networks. You'd have to believe that the NHL has been affected in some part by having a World Cup tournament in November and December. And again, even though those games were being played during the day, there's only so many hours of sports coverage that all of us can watch. So I think that's had an impact as well. And again, it's funny. Like I saw a tweet from Carlo Koliakovo today about the ratings in the U.S. And Carlo was pointing to a bunch of factors that the NHL still doesn't do a very good job marketing its stars, I think the playoff format isn't real user friendly. Again, you look at the Eastern Conference right now, and as much as people like to hate the Leafs, other than Clarkey, there's a team that's a really good hockey team, and there's a very good chance they're not going to win a playoff round again this year, because they're probably going to run into Boston or Tampa again, and that's a tough pill to swallow. And I think it is important for the NHL to have the Leafs win a playoff round. I think it's good for the business of the National Hockey League for the Leafs to play more than one round in the playoffs. But on the flip side, like, I watch a lot of hockey, Ryan, and the caliber of play has never been better. And there are a lot of stars in the game right now. And I do agree with Carlo. I think the NHL and the NHLPA haven't done nearly a good enough job promoting the stars. But as we both know, there's the culture of hockey. It's one where it's all about the team and not about me. And I think it's really hard to break down that silo.
I agree. And I saw, like many did, Carlo's tweet. Of course, Carlo on First Up on TSN 1050, friend of the show. He tweeted Quote, I hope this is a wake-up call for change in the NHL. Fans are losing interest. There's no rivalries. It's lacking storylines. There's more buzz around talk of trades than actual trades. Poor marketing of stars, which you just touched on, Steve. Too many math equations, a horrible playoff format, just to name a few. I agree. The playoff format needs to go back to 1 through 8. It was the best ever when it was 1 through 8. You never knew who you were going to play. Sometimes it came down to the last game of the season. I remember a few years back, there was a game, the final regular season game of the season, and the Flyers and Rangers were playing a win to get in. And the team in first place had no idea who they were playing that year until literally it went to a shootout as well. And if I remember correctly, Olli Jokinen scored the winner for the Rangers, I think. But either way, I agree. The playoff format needs to change. But Carlo highlighted something in there too, and we'll talk about marketing of stars as well, but he highlighted something in there too, and they've been talking about this a lot on Overdrive and all the other big sports programs up here, the lack of trade movement. Now, we just saw Bo Horvat get moved in a pretty major trade, which I just commenting on the trade myself, I thought that Vancouver got ripped off personally, but that's neither here nor there. That's the first big chip we've seen. What is your opinion of the trade landscape? And would you prefer the NHL institute some sort of luxury tax system where you could go over the cap, pay more into revenue sharing, potentially, whatever system you want to come up with, to facilitate more player movement? Because, man, the NBA, even the NFL, has way more movement. It's not even a comparison when you look at soccer in Europe. Way more player movement. Like, there's always a possibility your team could go out and really, really improve. Same with baseball. What are your thoughts on this? Like, can they fix this somehow?
Not under the current CBA, Ryan. I just think the cap rule that Gary Bettman wanted, it's really strangled teams' abilities to move players. And to Carlo's tweet today, I think there's way too much talk about the salary cap. Nobody wants to talk about the salary cap. I mean, I remember my days as a baseball writer, and I hated, as a baseball writer, journalists writing about salary arbitration and franchise values. And I think we all understand that those are part and parcel of covering the world of professional sports today. But when you're spending more time talking about a team not being able to move somebody because of salary cap implications, instead of talking about someone who's maybe chasing a 100-point season or a goalie who's chasing some kind of a consecutive wins record, that's a problem for your sport. Sports fans don't want to talk about salary caps. They want to talk about goals and assists and great plays and fights and saves and shootouts. And the cap system, to be honest, Ryan, it's got to the point where you really have to question why the likes of TSN and Sportsnet would do trade deadline shows now where there's such minimal movement because of the salary cap.
Yeah, I mean, those shows have turned into, and like they do the best they can. And there are a lot of good broadcasters on those programs, thank God, to listen to. But I feel for them, and O-Dog's one of the guys that kind of, I don't know that whines is the right word, but, he's just like, I don't even know why we're doing this anymore, kind of half jokingly, because, it's not the blockbuster event that it used to be. And it's because of this hard cap. Like, I remember in high school, my friends and I would skip school. We would skip school and like all hang out at my place and order pizzas. And we'd watch trade deadline day because you just couldn't wait to see what was going to happen. Your team was on a run. Somebody was going to get moved and acquired. And it was such an exciting day. And now it's really stifled. And I just think this hard cap system, I know that Gary wants to work for the owners and the line that they always kind of use as well, we're protecting the owners and GMs from themselves. As sports fans, what do we care if a millionaire makes a big payout contract and it doesn't work out? We don't care that a multi-billionaire paid a guy on a 9-year deal and he only played 4. That's not our problem. We're just excited about the content, and the content movement wise in the NHL is very lacking.
Yeah. And, you referenced the Bro Horvat trade earlier, Ryan, and again, part and parcel of why the Islanders didn't get the return that you thought they might have for Horvat is because of the salary cap implications and not knowing if the Islanders are going to be able to sign Horvat to a long-term contract next summer or whenever that may happen, or how a Horvat contract would affect the rest of the roster. So it's really tied the GM's hands in terms of making really good hockey trades too, Ryan. I think, like, again, you look at a guy like Horvat. I agree with you. You would think the Canucks could have got a lot more than what they got, but I think given the circumstances, getting Beauvillier or Ratune, I think they got a draft pick as well, isn't probably that bad a haul. Like I said, considering how Lamoriello's hands were tied.
You're right. I guess, like, I just sit there and look at the value of a guy like Horvat, and I still have too much of an old school way of thinking, I guess, because I look at it and go, I would have wanted way more. But you're right. It's so difficult in this system to get anybody because it has to be money in, money out. Clarkey's Leafs, there's lots of rumors. What are they going to do? Should they bolster their forward group? Should they get another defenseman? Well, there's all this talk and rumors swirling around a guy in San Jose like Timo Meier. Well, if the Leafs want to go get Timo Meier, how the hell are they going to be able to pull something like that off? This guy makes almost $7 million. You'd be asking San Jose to retain, and then you got to move out $3 or $4 million to make him come in. Who can the Leafs move? Kerfoot, I guess. I mean, it's just so difficult. And I'll always be a hockey fan. And of course you will too, Steve, but I get for new fans that maybe are more used to the baseball system or the ability of movement for different reasons in a sport like football or basketball, looking at this and going, this is kind of boring. And it is.
Yeah. And going back to what you said earlier too, Ryan, I mean, I think if you had a luxury tax in place, and again, I understand that why Gary Bettman wanted the salary cap system. The cap system has driven up franchise values for NHL owners because there's a cap on salaries. I mean, that was always Gary's motivation for getting the cap. And I go back to 1994 when I joined the NHLPA, right at the start of an owner's lockout. And that's what it was about back then. Gary wanted a salary cap to drive up franchise values by putting a cap on salary. And to your point, at least you had a luxury tax. Then teams like the Maple Leafs could spend a bit more money. And I think if you're a sports fan and if you're a Maple Leafs fan or a Detroit Red Wings fan, or if you're a fan of a franchise where they run a good business and they're making money, you want your team to have the ability to spend that money on players, and a luxury tax would help solve that problem. But I think that's going to be a tough nut to crack as long as Gary Bettman's commissioner. And every indication is that Gary's not leaving anytime soon.
Yeah, it seems that way. It's 30 years now that he's been in charge. And, obviously things like the Arizona situation don't help because you have to prop up more teams that just aren't making money. And I get it. They want to stay there. It's the fourth largest TV market in America, even though no one's watching. And yeah, it's frustrating because then teams, if they were in a situation as an example, and they were somewhere that was making more money and driving consistent revenue, teams that were spending into the luxury tax wouldn't need to allocate as many of those dollars toward propping up those franchises. They could allocate them somewhere else, or in the very least, maybe even offset the escrow that all the players hate. It's a complicated system for sure. Let's move on to another one. Let's talk about the All-Star game, because that's the marquee event, if you even want to call it that anymore, this weekend. And you see the goofiness here of the setup. Like, Horvat is still going to play for the Pacific Division as a member of the Islanders, and then Matty Beniers isn't going to go anymore for Seattle, and so they've replaced him with somebody else on a team that shouldn't maybe really have all-stars. And I brought up Arizona. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. They got good players. They shouldn't have anybody in the all-star game. This all-star system, and this feeds into what we could talk about marketing the game. The all-star game should be for all-stars. If one team has 6 guys that should be there, they should have 6 guys there. Boston should probably have 6 guys there. The Leafs should have 4 or 5. Like, I think it's so reductive to have to force. It's only in one city. If the host city, doesn't have somebody on the radar in a year, sure, they should have somebody in there. But Arizona and Columbus, and they shouldn't have anybody at the All-Star game. This is so goofy, and it's a bad way to market the game because the best players aren't necessarily all there, Steve.
Yeah, listen, Brian, as someone in their 60s who's been watching professional sports for a long time, going back to the 1960s, it's sad to see how all-star games have evolved, not only in hockey, but in all sports. Major League Baseball, the NBA. NBA not so much, because it feels to me that the NBA, you still get most of your star players. But it's become an obligation for players to go to an all-star weekend. And that wasn't the case in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was an honor and a privilege to go to the all-star game, and all the stars were there. And again, it may seem simple to your listeners, but I used to get the highlight of the Major League Baseball All-Star game for me was watching the players go on the field and get greeted. And I was in Montreal in 1982, I think, for the All-Star game when the Expos had 5 guys in the starting lineup: Gary Carter, Al Oliver, Tim Raines, Andre Dawson, and I think Steve Rogers was the starting pitcher. And, sitting at the Big O with 50,000 people, having those guys introduce and just lifting the roof off the stadium. And I think, it's if you're a sports fan, it's hard not to have a sour taste in your mouth when you see star players today looking for excuses not to go to the All-Star weekend. And I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. I think in hockey in particular, and the 82 game schedule is a real grind now. I think, I've been saying for a while now, I really wish the league would go back to a 74 or 72 game schedule. That's never going to happen. That's a pipe dream. That's just a loss of too much revenue for the owners, and the players would have to take a hit as well. But to me, those all-star games, regardless of the format or whatever you try to do, it's lost its luster because the best players in the world aren't participating in those weekends.
I agree. I just think it's a goofy system. Like, this is competitive sports, and I don't know why we have to have a kumbaya session where every team has to have a representative. Guess what? In every league, there's bad teams, and they probably should have players at your marquee all-star event. Like, I'm sorry, just there are guys that are there over the last number of years that just shouldn't be. And, back in the 80s, the Oilers would usually always send 5 or 6 guys because they had 5 or 6 guys that should have been there. And I would prefer that they just go back and market it properly. I wonder your opinion on this, Steve. I back when you're talking about, watching when all-star games were a really great thing and just tapping back on the marketability issues that the NHL seems to have. And let's be honest here, like, baseball's not far behind. Like, baseball's, I would even say, light years still ahead of the NHL, but they're still a little bit more reserved. But they do have guys, the Sotos of the world, Acuna, Vlad, guys like that are Jazz Chisholm Jr., who's on the cover of the video game this year. They got some guys that are starting to bring a little bit of flavor to it, where the NHL is lacking a little bit there. Do you think that social media has played a big part in that? Like, do you think that it's a situation where guys now are a little too, afraid of exposing too much of themselves, their personal lives, whatever, making a mistake, that sort of thing? Because you listen to stories of guys talking about, the 80s and 90s, the wild parties that would go on, stuff like that as an example. Well, now everyone's got a camera on their phone. Just how much do you think that plays into the mentality of maybe guys being a little more wooden in front of the camera, if you will?
Yeah, I still believe, Ryan, a lot of it is that culture with hockey where you're the player's you're not supposed to be bigger than the team. And so for that reason, we haven't seen over 50 years where a lot of NHL players have had endorsement deals. Like Wayne Gretzky kind of broke the mold. And Gretzky followed guys like Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull. Like, there were some big names playing in the NHL before Wayne Gretzky came along, but you never saw them pitching cars or banks in the U.S. Compared with baseball players, whether that would be a Hank Aaron or a Nolan Ryan or the basketball stars of the day like Bird and Johnson and Thomas and those guys. So I think that hockey hasn't helped themselves. And I would suggest something that came to mind with me a lot when I worked at the NHLPA, Ryan, it didn't seem to me that the agents did a lot of work on behalf of the players in terms of getting endorsement deals. And I think Donnie Meehan Newport Group was one of the first companies where they actually hired someone to do some marketing on behalf of the players. You saw J.P. Barry and Pat Brisson when they joined the CAA group that they've certainly, and now with Wasserman and Jeff Jackson, you see a lot more being done for guys like Matthews and McDavid. But I think it's that mentality where you look at basketball and basketball players, they're encouraged to be themselves. Like you see LeBron Johnson wearing a suit jacket and shorts to a game, and in the newsletter this week we have Nike's just collaborated with an esports company out in California to launch a new LeBron James shoe, and the NBA really encourages that personality to come out and to be shown. And I still don't think that's the case in hockey. And as much as, people will talk about Austin Matthews and being, wearing funky clothes and guys walking in the rink with their suits on or whatever, that's not translating into marketing dollars for the most part.
No, it really isn't. And I agree as well. I just wondered, because I've heard people point that out. Oh, well, the social media and everybody's got a camera. Well, they do on the basketball players and the football players and a lot of those baseball players too. And I just think that, hockey seems to have, for some parts better and for some parts worse. I appreciate the candor, if you will, I guess, in some respects of the culture of the, we, not me. I get it. There is something endearing about that. But, if you want to catch up in this new social media world and get more people hooked, you need people with a bit of electricity to them that are going to lure them in, right? And it's hard. And hey, baseball is an example. I still think most people would say, I would, that Mike Trout's the best player still playing baseball. There are guys that are catching him a little bit, sure, but he's not a very electric personality. He's just a really damn good ball player. But there are guys around him in the league that are starting to really pick that up, and the new age, the bat flips. And I love that stuff. I think it's great for the sport, and they have their challenges too. But overall, I think that the NHL, I don't know that a problem's necessarily, worth using as a word here, but it's a challenge for them. And I wonder what they could do. And I wonder this quickly too, before we take a break, just in terms of marketability. And maybe this also factors into the television numbers too. There's just too many streaming services. They've divvied up the pie. And now, like in the States, if you want to be able to watch literally every game, you got to subscribe to like 3 or 4 different places. And it's not much better in Canada. And blackouts have got to stop across all sports. Let us watch the product how we want it. And I wonder what you think about that, because blackouts drive me insane. I think they suck.
No, it's crazy, right? Like I'm sitting at home last night with my wife watching. There's nothing on television, and Montreal and Ottawa are playing on TV, and I can't watch the game because it's blacked out. I mean, that's on a night when the Leafs aren't playing, and you and I are sitting in Bruce and Huron County. That makes no sense at all. I will say, in terms of the all the various distribution platforms now, that's not going to change because money talks. And
no.
If you can, look at the NFL. If you can get Amazon and Apple and Fox and NBC and CBS and ESPN all writing you checks, they're gonna take the money and run. I just want to go back quickly to the marketability. One thing about the NHL, and like no disrespect at all to Paul Bisnet, because Biz has done an incredible job marketing his brand. Spit Chicklets is a highly successful podcast. He's got the TNT deal. He's done such a great job of marketing himself and giving himself a lucrative career after his playing career. But to me, it's a bit of indictment on the NHL if Paul Bisnet's one of your poster boys. Where if you turn on an NFL show on a Sunday morning and you watch a pregame show or a studio show, you're seeing Terry Bradshaw, Phil Simms, Boomer Esiason, Keyshawn Johnson,
Randy Moss.
You're seeing the stars. You turn on, the best studio show in pro sports in North America, hands down, is the NBA on TNT.
Oh, by a landslide.
Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley. So again, I don't want God love Paul Bisnet. Good for him for everything he gets, every penny that Paul Bisnet earns, he deserves. But again, if Paul Bisnet's one of the guys if he's one of your faces of the NHL, that to me, that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. It would be better if there were some stars in there from glory days past that could offer a little more. I don't know, down in the US, what's Brian Leach up to? What's a guy like that up to? Just somebody that could really, what's Scott Niedermayer doing? Somebody like that just was a big name that could bring a little more clout, if you will. I'd say, if he wasn't a very successful general manager, a guy like Joe Sakic. I actually said years ago that I think that, and it could still happen, whenever Gary does move aside, I think Joe Sakic would be an unbelievable commissioner. I really do. I think he'd be a great commissioner. But yeah, you're right. The NHL, even in terms of their broadcasting product, isn't bringing the same kind of star level and glitz and glamour, certainly, as TNT, or even something like football with the Manning cast. That's Peyton Manning, man, and his brother is a pretty good player too. Yeah, it's different. So, all right, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, lots to still talk about, including some baseball news. Of course, Jays pitchers and catchers are reporting this month. Everybody's excited about the upcoming Jays season. What's going to happen with the Tampa Bay Rays? Some confusion, I guess, is the right word, around their future in the Tampa Bay market. Could Steve McAllister's Montreal Expos come back someday? And of course, we'll chat a bit of soccer too, because there's been some crazy stuff going on in the soccer world. We'll talk about that next here on Instigating. Welcome back. Wrapping things up this week on Instigating with Clarkey and Drury. Ryan Drury back here. Clarkey, of course, still on vacation, and we're very pleased that we're still joined by our great friend from the Parleh, Steve McAllister. Thanks for riding shotgun through the whole show, my friend.
No, it was my pleasure, Ryan. I've got a feeling this might be the best show that you've done. You've done that having Clarkey here to gum up the works.
Yeah, that's it. You think I fly a little higher as a solo eagle, maybe?
Hey, there's no doubt about it. No doubt about it, Ryan. And I'm dragging you down here too, not just Clarkey.
Oh, God, no, you're selling yourself short, man. We always love your thoughts on a variety of sports. We talked a lot of hockey in the last segment, as we should. All-Star game coming up this weekend. Obviously, some baseball news, too. Now, we'll talk a bit about the Jays and your thoughts on their offseason. I think it's been pretty good and really improved the other day, getting Chad Green on a bit of a sweetheart deal, if he can stay healthy, mind you. But, man, that guy's career numbers, whew, that's an arm to put in your bullpen if he's healthy. But really quick, we were alluding to it kind of jokingly at the end of the last segment. Tampa Bay, I mean, there's been a lot of rumors about movement of teams. Nashville, of course, is going to be getting, or it seems to be gearing up toward getting an expansion franchise. Talk about that in Portland maybe as well. We all know what's going on with, there's always rumors about my Oakland A's moving, and they won't be my A's anymore if they do. But the Rays as well. I mean, we all know what's going on with the Trop. Everyone hates the Trop. Their own players hate the Trop. And there's rumors swirling that they could potentially get a new stadium more toward downtown in St. Pete. But there's also some rumors swirling where their team president, Mr. Ald down there, was very non-committal about the team's future in Tampa, which of course got speculation running again that maybe the Expos could sneak back in there. Who knows? What are your thoughts on this? Would it be in Major League Baseball's best interest to relocate back to Montreal, which of course would need a stadium and a lot of funding and some big money behind it? Or would they be better off trying to stay in Tampa or move somewhere else in the U.S.?
Yeah, staying in Tampa seems to be a real tough road to hoe, Ryan. And again, that's been the case for a long time. And it kind of feels like, Rob Manfred is Tampa Bay is his child, kind of like Arizona is Gary Bettman's child with the NHL. And how long are you willing to hang in? And listen, this Rays organization, they're one of the best organizations in Major League Baseball in the way they develop players and have been competitive for a long time now. And it's got to be disheartening to be a member of that organization and be in a pennant race in August and see 5,000 people sitting in a stadium. And how much longer can you do that, especially when you have other options? I mean, you mentioned Nashville, you mentioned Portland. I think both of those cities would be great Major League Baseball markets. Montreal, there's a lot of question marks. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that there's a very passionate fan base that would support that team, just like they supported the Expos back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, or most of the 90s. But is there enough corporate support in Montreal? Yeah, absolutely. I think have to have local ownership in Montreal to make a Major League Baseball team work their work. As you mentioned, you need to have a downtown stadium if it's going to work properly. So I still think Montreal's a long shot. In the same way that, and I know this, it pains me to say this, in the same way I see Quebec City as a long shot to get an NHL franchise back there, Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. There would be a lot more hurdles in both of those situations you just referenced for Montreal and Quebec City, by extension in NHL terms, than US markets. And I believe Robbie Manfred would love to keep them in Tampa somehow, because the Southern Florida TV market is valuable. No, it's not New York or California or even Arizona, as an example. I mean, though the support of the Diamondbacks, it's really more of a football and college basketball town or state. But yeah, I think that his gear is more bent toward trying to keep them there. But it is interesting, you're right, because they are a really well-run franchise from a front office perspective. Whether you want to talk about, much like my Oakland A's, the ownership commitment, which is lacking at best, man, they crank out some really great players. And my God, like, I don't know how teams in Major League Baseball don't have the memo yet. Do not do trades with the Tampa Bay Rays. They're thieves. Every time they make a trade with somebody, they get like 3 guys out of the deal that turn into superstars. Ask Pittsburgh how they feel about Tyler Glass now, who is my favorite pitcher in Major League Baseball, by the way, in case you were wondering. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. Let's shift our focus, though, more toward the Jays here before we get some chat in about Clarkey's favorite sport, soccer. What do you think of their offseason? I mean, it's been pretty exciting. They brought in some really quality veteran pieces. I just mentioned recently they had Chad Green, who has had some health scares, yes, but when he's healthy, my God, his numbers are gross. And I'm sure I know Yankees fans on Twitter, they're just throwing up that the Jays have this guy now. It's going to be awesome to watch the AL East this year. I might venture to say, Steve, this might be the best year to watch the AL East in 20 years. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Ryan. I like what the Jays have done as well. And, they absolutely needed some bullpen help. That's the one thing that blew me away. And I didn't watch a lot of Major League Baseball during the regular season last year, but I watched a lot of the playoffs and the entire World Series. And it's just obvious now, just having those high-powered arms in the bullpen. And it just, the way the game's played now, it's just not good enough to have someone who throws in the high 80s coming in the 7th or 8th inning. Like you see, like the Phillies and these teams in the playoffs, they've got guys coming in the 7th inning who are throwing in the mid to high 90s. And that's what the game's about now. There's no doubt in my mind that Jays have enough offense to go on a long run in the AL East and get to the playoffs and maybe do some damage. The only thing that I question about that ball team, Ryan, is their ability to play sound fundamental baseball. And it's a team that doesn't help their pitching out a whole lot because they don't play as well defensively as I think they should. I'm still a bit of, I think that successful teams need to play a little bit of small ball once in a while. You are going to have dry spells through a 162 game season. So you need to manufacture runs. I don't know if this team can do that, but I absolutely agree. I think the AL East is going to be an absolute blast to watch if you're a baseball fan.
Yeah, it's going to be an electric factory. And I think that the moves that they made do kind of reflect exactly the criticism that you just levied. You know, they moved Teoscar Hernandez, who is a big power guy, awful strikeout numbers, though, really bad strikeout numbers. And they end up going and they get Dalton Varsho. They pay a premium to get him, of course, in prospect capital. Yes, they did. But they bring in Varsho, who's unreal on the base paths. He's in the 92nd percentile in base running speed. He's great at stealing. And we know that, you know, if his health holds up, Kevin Kiermaier likes to steal a base. One of the best defensive center fielders out there. You can shift George over to right, Varsho play left. You've already got my guy, and I'm still infuriated that Matt Chapman was not a Gold Glove winner this year. That is embarrassing. He is the best defensive third baseman in baseball. Nolan Arenado's right there with him, but that still made me mad. And yeah, there's still some question marks at, you know, second and short. Is Bo a legit shortstop? I think this year is probably the last year with his ARB case coming up. I'll be interested to see what he gets in ARB to find out. He's got to really knuckle down defensively, but they did address some of those issues, I think, with the guys they brought in. And I really love getting Chris Bassett, my guy, the Bassett Hound from Oakland, of course, played in New York last year. I love that. I think that they have some great pitching depth to kind of take a bit of pressure, Steve, off of a recovering Jose Barrios who needs to build his psyche back up.
Yeah, and just again, the way the game's played now too, Ryan. You're going to need you're probably going to run through as many as 10 starting pitchers during the season with injuries and that. So I do like the Jays' depth at the starting position, and yeah, I think. A comeback season by Barrios is an absolute must if this team is going to get to the playoffs and then do some damage. But I don't see starting pitching as a problem with this team at all.
I don't either. All right, let's talk a little bit about Clarkey's favorite sport, soccer. Transfer deadline day is over. We're actually recording this the day after the deadline's all closed over in Europe. Big money getting splashed around, and I know your guy, James Sharman, and the people over at Room 442 are going to be chatting a lot about it. I mean, it's the talk of the soccer world, just some massive money getting thrown around. A record for January transfer windows over in England, 815 million pounds spent. Javier Tebas, who is the commissioner essentially of La Liga, Spain's main league, he came out and had some blistering comments about the English market being doped up and thieving talent and how it's not fair and it's bad for football. What are your thoughts on that? Like my favorite team, Chelsea, boy, did they ever splash the cash. Todd Bailey walking in there and just throwing money around like it doesn't exist. I have mixed feelings, obviously. As a Chelsea fan, I'm happy that they're spending money and stuff. But what's your opinion? Like, is it ruining the game a little bit to have this much financial clout seemingly focused on one country? And do you think that whether it be UEFA or FIFA need to come in and have harder, almost salary cap-esque rules, Steve?
Yeah, I think you want, if you're a soccer fan, Ryan, I think you want to have a strong Bundesliga and you want to have a strong La Liga and you want to have a strong Serie A. And I think if all the best players in the world are gathering in the UK, I don't think that's good for the sport. It's funny when you mentioned James Sharman. We had Sharman on our LinkedIn audio show during the World Cup tournament, and the one word of caution he gave was he said that teams often in the transfer period they look at players who had great World Cup tournaments and throw a boatload of money at those players, and then when they join those clubs, they don't play nearly as well as they did during the World Cup. And you wonder how much of that silly money happened for that reason, especially with the World Cup being played so close to the transfer window this year when, as we both know, normally the World Cup is played during the summertime. So it's interesting to watch. But I think you make a valid point, and I don't think it's good. As you said, it may be good for a Chelsea fan when you see a team picking up lots of players or picking up the best player in the transfer window period. I don't think it's good for the league if you have 3 or 4 teams that are always getting the big players and the other teams in the league are just struggling to keep their existing roster afloat.
Yeah, you can't really compete anymore, it seems, unless you have some Saudi prince or oil baron buy your team. I mean, like, that's just the way it is. And I agree. Like, yes, I'm a Chelsea fan, and you mentioned the World Cup hype and maybe overspending on players. I mean, that I'm thrilled they bought Enzo Fernandez at the last minute, but that's a lot of money breaking a British transfer fee for a kid that before the World Cup, I'd never even heard of him, Steve. So I hope that that's 120 million pounds well spent. But my goodness, like I do feel, and you mentioned the Bundesliga, I really feel like the rules they have there should be instituted everywhere, where 51, it's a law there in German football, 51% of every club has to be owned by fans. If you're a majority owner, you can only own up to 49%. And I actually think there might be a rule where if you're one of the owners of that 49%, you can only solely own up to 30 of it. You have to have other partners involved. You can't just own the other 49%, one conglomerate or company, if you will. I've always really liked that structure, and I feel like that should be instituted everywhere, Steve.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. And I think anytime you can have fans involved as essentially investors, that's a good thing, because you have people who are closely tied to the club, and the decisions that they make are going to be done, I would suggest in most cases, for the betterment of the club. And also there's a respect there for history and that. And I remember, Ryan, when George Gillette bought and Tom Hicks bought Liverpool, there was a lot of criticism. And I think they were one of the first owners that kind of come from outside the club and buy a Premier League club. And those guys took a lot of flack because they were seen as outsiders who had no appreciation or connection to the history of that franchise. And the one thing I would say in defense of George Gillette, because I got to see George a little bit up close during his time as the owner of the Montreal Canadiens, I do think George, certainly with the Canadiens, appreciated the history of that franchise and the culture, and actually was a good owner for that team. And I find, I have to believe that George had the same foresight and insight as it related to his ownership of the Liverpool franchise.
Well, Sharms would be the right guy to ask about that. He's a big fan of the Reds, of course. Yeah. It's interesting, and it's a tough challenge, because yes, of course, it's good to have money and it's good to have investment, but there is a real tribalism with soccer, football, more than any other sport, really. And I do feel like a lot of power has been taken away from the fans. And one last thing I'd like to ask you about, just on a broad scale, and we've talked about this with you before, and I remember you mentioning a conversation you had at a conference with Brian Burke about this, and that's ticket prices and just the affordability of being a sports fan in these modern times. And it's impossible. It's impossible to afford to be a fan at that really dedicated, almost familial level where your parents went and your grandparents had seats, and that type of stuff is just not happening now, because it's just far too expensive. And I remember you telling Clarkey and I about that conversation you had with Brian Burke, and he kind of disagreed with you on the zenith of ticket prices, and maybe we're reaching a peak where it's just not sustainable anymore. Where do you sit with that now? Because, I mean, the ticketing industry in general, I could go on an hour-long rant about Ticketmaster and Live Nation and what they've done to the music business. It's sickening. It's gross what they're doing. They have their money and their hands in the sports business too. Is that going to continue to drive interest down in maybe a league like the NHL, where it's just getting so expensive to attend one event, Steve?
Yeah, I'm in two minds on this one, Ryan. Again, and it's funny, when I worked for the Players Association, it's in 1994. It was funny, like Gary Bettman, one of his lines to the media was that if salaries went down, ticket prices would go down, which everybody should have known was a crock of crap. And I would go home to Prescott, my hometown, Eastern Ontario, and I would play shinny with the guys on the Sunday morning, and they would be grousing me about ticket prices and blaming it on player salaries. And I would have to politely explain to my high school buddies that, no, that's not the way it works. If Eric Lindros makes less money and people want to go see Eric Lindros play, they're going to pay more money to watch Eric Lindros play. It doesn't matter what he makes. And I mentioned that because I was having a conversation. I have 3 children. I was having a conversation with my youngest daughter a couple of weeks ago. She'd been down to see a Sabres game, and I was kind of apologizing to her that we didn't get a chance as a family to go watch a lot of pro sports games when my kids were growing up, and to be honest, it was because we couldn't afford it. And my wife and I both had good careers, and people might say, well, you probably spent your money on something else, but I think we were an average Canadian family, and I haven't gone to one NHL game in my lifetime with my wife and 3 children. I've taken my daughters to Leaf games. My son and I have gone to Sabres games or Leaf games, and my wife and I have gone to sporting events. But as a family, we've never gone to a National Hockey League hockey game, and I would suggest that's common with a lot of Canadian families, unfortunately. And I don't know how you change it, Ryan, because I every time we say that prices can't go any higher, they do, and I think that ship has kind of sailed.
Well, as Brian Johnson of AC/DC once said, money talks, and that just is the way it goes, my friend. Steve, I appreciate you doing this. He is Steve McAllister. You can follow him on Twitter at Stevie Mac Sports, editor-in-chief of Gaming News Canada and host of the Gaming News Canada show, also involved with the Parleh Group. You can follow them on social media at The Parleh, spelled A like Canadian A. That's easy to remember. Steve, I really appreciate you doing this, my friend. It's always great having you on the show. It won't be the last time. It never will be. We always want to have you back. Thanks so much for filling in for Clarkey. You did great.
Brian, it's always a lot of fun, and I'll even come back when Clarkey here again. I'll be happy to come and join him as well.
Absolutely. Sounds good. All right. That's it for the show this week. Remember, you can watch this show Friday nights at 8, Sunday nights at 9 with our friends on Whiteman TV. That's channel 6 for Whiteman subscribers. You can follow the show on social media at Instigating Pod. And remember, the show debuts on our YouTube channel at 9 o'clock on Friday nights. For myself, Ryan Drury, all of our great sponsors, Coolbet Canada, our friends over at Larry Hudson, Chevrolet Buick GMC here in Listowel, Ontario, and of course, the Listowel Squash Courts. And for our friend Steve McAllister, really appreciate you guys listening to and watching Instigating. We'll be back next week.